With the current prices in lumber, it's actually a more expensive jack than the one in the front. I'm bougie like that. That is ridiculous. Some people's kids. Found a set of factory DX shocks from a guy on Instagram. Typical of Harley, they are leaking oil. But the spring rates are correct, as compared to these Sportster shocks. And while I'm not completely thrilled on that, it's not that big of a deal. This is going to be a stunt bike, and for doing hood rat shit. I did not buy a Dyna to go hit the twisties with, I can promise you that. Instead, what it will get, snow tires, or mud tires, depending on the season, or this sweet sticky Shinko for doing wheelies. But changing the suspension is not what today's video is all about. Today's video, what we're going to be going over is disassembling the triple trees on this and pulling the bearings, and a few different methods that you may be able to use given the tools at your house or your shop or maybe even your work. So let's do this.
Advertise, it's no surprise the way they hide, and where's the line?
In the last video, we discussed how to get to this point in your life. Step 1, drop out of community college to pursue emotionally damaged women. 2, the band's gonna make it. 3, the band didn't make it. Steps 4 through 6 go something like drugs, trade school, poor diet, and if done correctly, you wind up owning a motorcycle repair shop in the least populated state in the country. So for all you ambitious kids out there taking notes, that's how it's done.
Wash your hands, Mr. Flesh-eating virus, kill you where you stand. Wash your hands, bacterial infection in your dick was not the plan. Wash your hands, spinal meningitis is your #1 fan. Wash your hands, because pink eye on your tits would be a drag.
Alright, now that we have the triple trees off the bike, we'll remove the lower bearing. The steering stem is stepped to allow the upper portion of the steering stem to travel through the lower portion of the triple clamp without much more than a slight drag. It also allows the upper bearing to float on the upper portion of the stem, which is crucial for setting the steering head on final assembly. The lower portion of the stem is ever so slightly wider, providing a press fit for the lower triple clamp, along with a press fit for the lower bearing, as you can tell. Now there are a couple different options for getting the lower bearing off the steering stem. If you have access to a press, most late model factory triple clamps, aside from the touring ones, which are welded on the bottom, allow you to press the steering stem out of the lower bracket. This allows you to save the lower bearing. If you're just servicing the lower bearing or something, this is a good option. A steering stem bearing puller, like this one from Motion Pro, is also available, but it requires you to cut the outer cage of the bearing to expose the inner race on the bearing, like this, to get a grip on. So yeah, you'll obviously have to replace that bearing. Just set dikes, and it will fall off, just like that. Oh yeah, this one's smoked. You can actually feel those ridges with your fingernail. There's no saving that. Even if we didn't cut the cage, that one's completely smoked. Bearings are cheap, and they're real easy to replace. If you're in question at all, just replace them.
Right around when you apologized, you couldn't realize all the time that it might take. That's my mistake, I didn't know just how deep it really goes. Two sources of
And that's how you remove a bearing with heat.
If you have access to a press, this is one of the easier ways to go about this. You want to find something where the stem can travel through, but not fall and damage it. So what I'm using is this conduit coupling. This is there in support around this area. That way you're not putting too much stress on the lower clamp itself. Make sure everything's ported and start applying pressure. One thing I also forgot to mention is you want to take note of where, if you have an internal lock, what you'll want to do is take note of the orientation of this slot right there. That way when you go back together with it, you can line that up. There it goes. And so yeah, that presses out the stem and the bearing at the same time. You can pull all of this off. This is a little bit rusty, so it's a bit tricky to take apart. I might need to clean up that shaft, but one way or another, you can see that it floats on here now. And that's how you take it apart. So there you have it. A mediocre at best demonstration on how to replace the steering head bearings and disassemble the triple tree. I went online to find different creative ways that people had used to accomplish this at home or in a pinch without the correct tools. One of the ideas was the heat gun, which seemed like a much more common or easy tool to acquire than some of the other methods that I demonstrated with varying degrees of success. While I may not have given it enough of a shot, in the traditional Wilson fashion, I gave the fuck up. The second method that I attempted was applying heat via a welding machine. Again, it seemed like a much more common piece of equipment to either have or be able to borrow than some of the other methods that I demonstrated. When heated, metal will expand, so what you're trying to do is concentrate a whole bunch of heat into that inner bearing, which would cause it to expand enough to just fall off the shaft, which, as you saw when I smacked it on the table, I didn't do a very good job of. I then tried to apply more heat to the backside, and, well, at that time, I decided to resort to the mechanical bearing heater. It doesn't really create heat. The fourth and final method was the easiest, but the one I saved for last because I figured the general public as a whole would be less likely to have access to a press than some of the other methods that I demonstrated, excluding the manual bearing heater. I'm sure you can find reading material for days on social media about other creative ways on how to pull bearings. If you have one and you would like me to attempt it, leave a comment below detailing it. And if it sounds feasible or just straight up ridiculous, I might make a video on doing it. Alright, thanks guys.